one of the things I really strive for when I create my art is to take complex ideas and sort of summarize them into a very short and brief and easy to ingest, and yet at the same time something that will make you think and make you and can kind of expand inside your mind a little bit once you've read the statement.
Welcome back to the 25th episode of the Vibes Podcast with your hosts, Ted and Med.
I'm Med.
And I'm Ted. And today we brought on a very special guest in the street art aspect, huge in LA, and travels all over actually. And you might have seen some of his work just passing by, going to work, just walking the streets of LA. Morley, nice to have you on, buddy.
Nice to be here. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you coming on. So I guess what we like to do when we bring on guests is usually go from the beginning until where you guys are now. So I guess if you could just start telling us who Morley is, like where'd you grow up and things like that.
Well, I was born and raised in Iowa City, Iowa, which is the Midwest, but it's sort of like... it's a college town, so it's sort of like the kind of, it's like the Austin in Texas. It's like Iowa City is like Austin in terms
Iowa
of
City, Iowa.
in terms of being like a little bit like, when I say I'm from Iowa, people sort of picture cornfields and stuff like that. But Iowa City was a little bit more of like a city type.
What was like
situation.
the population? Like how many?
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, when you're a kid, it feels like a lot. But then when I visit now, I'm like, man, this city is so small. But I mean, I would say it was a middle, like, it's funny when I watch like TV shows and stuff of like suburbia and stuff like that, it feels, that's what Iowa felt like to me.
Got it. Okay. So, grew up in Iowa. What were your parents like? Were you...
My parents were always pretty encouraging of artistic stuff. Iowa City is kind of a hippie-esque kind of town, and so there's a lot of art is looked at fondly, and my mom was always very encouraging, and maybe even to a detrimental point, sort of like like she always encouraged me to chase my dreams, but I don't think she ever thought beyond sort of the like you can do anything type of thing. And sometimes it's like, okay, it's good to know how I will do anything, so she was, but when you're a kid, it doesn't really matter too much. So it was great to have her as a mom. My parents divorced when I was young, and so I grew up mainly with my mom and my sister, and she just always encouraged me. And when I was younger, I grew up loving movies and loving storytelling in that sort of way. It felt like all of the sort of art forms combined. So I was really interested in filmmaking and became fixated on screenwriting specifically.
Interesting.
So that when I graduated high school, I moved to New York City and started a school there called the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, where I majored in screenwriting. And screenwriting to me was fantastic, but the problems that I faced when I got to college was the layers and layers of permission that were required in order to sort of make your art and to kind of get your artwork in front of an audience. It required a lot of, like first you have to write the script, then you have to try and get, actors interested and money, and then you have to try and make the film, and then you have to try and get it into, film festivals, and then get distribution. And only then can you even really try to get people to come into your movie theater and watch your movie. And it just became really stifling and frustrating. And so while I was in college, I started seeing street art in New York. In Iowa, there really wasn't a lot of street art, obviously. And so, but in New York, it was sort of, I was there around from 2000 to 2004, and it was, Shepard Fairey was obviously getting up a lot. And I saw a lot of great artists in New York that I just became seduced by this idea that you could create art that lived out its purpose without it having to go through all these different, velvet ropes and bouncers and, people that were sort of like curating what people saw. It was like, wow. So instead of it being like a flyer for your band's show, like the poster or the piece of art that was painted on the street was the show. It was like people had, instead of, I guess I often say, instead of asking people to come into your gallery, your world, and see what you're doing, you're bringing your art into
Display.
their world. Yeah. And so I started creating things just to kind of express myself and just to kind of get my desire to be heard and to, you know, and to just to be heard and to really kind of just scratch the itch of creativity that you feel. So I started doing things like I started silk screening messages onto contact paper, the stuff that you like line cupboards with and stuff like that. And I would stick them
like
around
quotes.
messages, quotes, little things like that, you know, and things that I would come up with, and then I would stick them around the subway. And I just liked the idea of all the different people that could possibly see it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent a little bit of time. I lived in Baltimore, and then I moved out here. And once I got out here, my desires sort of changed a little bit, because now there wasn't like a sort of subway system the way that there is in New York, where it's like everyone takes it, you know.
Right.
I wanted to create art that could be seen as you're driving in your car, you know, 35 miles an hour down the street. So I started creating posters that were much bigger. And then I also decided that I wanted there to be a sort of a theme or a trademark, you know, but I didn't want it to be a logo or a brand. I thought I wanted to be the words of a friend, or the messages coming from a kindred spirit. So I started drawing myself into the artwork in order to give it sort of that human tone, so that it wasn't just messages from a sort of disembodied voice from above. It was like, I'm a person just like you, and the messages that I have are for, you know, people that are going through the same stuff that I'm going through. And, you know, we're in these trenches together. So,
and when you put a face to a message, it resonates much more, because
right, yeah,
like, you know, it's coming from someone just like you, and it's not some like company that's like, it resonates definitely way more with you, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's, you know, you think it disarms you a little bit, because you realize, oh, this is a person. This isn't something that has an agenda necessarily,
right.
you know. But at the same time, though, it's, you know, it can be frustrating, because people can misread that and think, oh, it's like egotism. I'm trying to like make myself famous or something like that, which was genuinely not ever the idea or of the point of doing it. It was really because I didn't want to be confused with a corporation that had a very specific sort of goal in mind, you know. Looking back, now that it's become sort of, at the time it was more of a hobby, and now it's become like a career and an actual, like, my full-time sort of thing. And now looking back, I'm like, man, if I had been a little bit smarter, I might have actually gone with something that was like, you know, like Banksy has his rats, or, you know, whatever. I could have used
like not your face.
Yeah, well, only because it's a lot easier to, you know, put that stuff on T-shirts and posters, you know, rather than a sort of goofy looking guy with glasses.
So the people that are watching, if they don't know exactly, we'll display some. Like, we'll have some of your art displayed, but basically it's like quotes or sayings, word art, and Morley's picture, or how would you say, Morley's face and his body, like half his body, is placed among, like, next to it, and so
kind of his signature, right?
Yeah, it's the idea was that, like, that I'm sort of drawing these words up on the wall.
Yeah, it's you like kind of looking up to the words,
and the messages are, you know, generally sort of positive, and, like, you know, the idea is to sort of encourage people and to give them something to sort of hope for, or, you know, aspire to, or whatever. Or sometimes it's just sort of to make people laugh, or give them some food for thought, you know.
What would you say? Yeah,
I was gonna say, what was your first piece that you ever did?
Well, I'm trying to think. I guess my one of my first pieces was one that just said "Live well, love easy," and the idea behind that was just to encourage people to sort of open their hearts a little bit more, and actually, like, you know, whether it's, you know, sort of the broad idea of kindness being a good thing, but also I found that I never understood people that had their guard up all the time, that were like, I don't want to fall in love, you know, because then you're vulnerable. But to me, it seemed like, why would you, like, why wouldn't you jump into it, you know, and embrace that? Why wouldn't you want to experience love more? So that was why the sort of message was just, you know, fall in love easy, you know, live well that way.
But I mean, you know, it's easy. I feel like it's easy to say, like, why would you not? Because if you put yourself in a vulnerable position, like you said, it's easy to say that. But how would you like what would you say to people that are, because like what I guess what I'm trying to ask is what made you become a vulnerable person? Because a lot of people, let's say, go through tough times and they lock their emotions, so when they see something like that, they get even pissed off, right?
Yeah.
Because they just hate everything. So
Yeah, no, I've had people respond that way to my work before. It's you know, I mean, that they have every right to sort of their opinion on it. For me, I find that to speak into people's lives, and I mean this with friends or you know, acquaintances, to have any kind of to be given the privilege to speak into someone's life, I think you need to be honest and you need to be vulnerable, because that's how you build trust. That's how you create a relationship, by people seeing, oh, this person's putting themselves out there. I can take a step towards them because I don't feel sort of the aggression of walls being built up. And so for me, it was like, I only wanted to create artwork that I could relate to or that I could appreciate, because if I can't relate to it, then no one else is going to, or at least I can't assume anyone else will appreciate it. So I always made it a point to create the kind of work that if I was walking down the street would either encourage me or challenge me. I mean, a lot of the things that I have about, like, you know, don't give up or whatever, that type of sentiment is something that I need just as much as anybody who would walk by something I've created. And so, you know, it's interesting because in the same way that someone who, you know, maybe is having a bad day and you walk up and you say, hey man, what's going on? And they are like, why don't you leave me alone? That kind of mentality is, you know, I'm sure I've experienced that on the street. I know one guy once said to me, he's like, when I first saw your work, I didn't like it because it was like, don't tell me how to feel. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting response. I never considered that someone would feel like I was being aggressive in terms of my suggestions, you know, in the same way that I am sort of surprised because no one necessarily feels that kind of attack when they walk by a billboard that says, if you buy this energy drink, you'll feel much better.
They're not used to seeing that.
Yeah. And so I think sometimes it's interesting to me when I'm putting up my artwork, how much people will often respond to it as, you know, they will think it's vandalism, and perhaps it is. But to me, it seems like, but if I was putting up an advertisement, I guarantee you a lot fewer people would have a problem with it. And it's like, but I'm not necessarily trying to sell you anything by putting this up. I'm just putting it up to make the world maybe a slightly kinder place.
Right.
I feel like because maybe the way that I feel like they would kind of understand is that when you see an advertisement, they're selling you like a product, an item, a service. Here you're kind of selling them a personality.
Right.
And that I feel like is so much harder to acquire and purchase. As opposed to like just an iPhone, like you see an Apple ad. So maybe that's why it's more of a difficult purchase to make.
Yeah.
Especially for people. So I think that's why you can't always please anyone. I mean.
Oh, absolutely.
So
yeah. No, it's very true. And it's been a challenge, obviously, because for me, I want my art to feel nuanced. I want it to grow. And so after, you know, years and years of doing this, there's the challenge of like, okay, well, what if I want the messages to sort of mature as I'm maturing as an artist? So I try to create, in the last few years, especially, I've tried to sort of move beyond the sort of just like positive aphorisms and move into something that would be a little bit more poetic or a little bit more just challenging in a different kind of way. Maybe it's, you know, telling someone, you know, like maybe consider why you're chasing the dream as opposed to just don't give up on it. You know, think about what it is about this dream that you're hoping to accomplish, whether it's, do you feel like if I just get famous enough, then I'll finally feel loved, you know, or if I just get enough money, then I'll finally feel like safe, that, you know, I'm okay, or that I'm made my parents proud or whatever. I think analyzing those things are very important, because as I've gotten older, I've realized how important that is to really sort of figure out why you're chasing something in the first place, you know?
Have you said challenging things. Have you ever put up anything controversial? Like, of course, this is not my belief, but something that's like screw Trump, or something that like would get people either pissed off or think a little bit too much?
Well, it's, you know, I've had people that have misunderstood my posters, and that's been a challenge. I had, you know, one time I put up a poster that said, "I love you because we hate the same stuff," which I just meant as, we connect because we dislike these things, and that sort of becomes a unifying thing, more so even than the things that we both like. It's more the things that we dislike that sort of you can find some sort of kinship in. And someone said, like, the Nazis all bound together because of their shared hatred of Jewish people. And I was like, wow, that is a
took it too far,
very big of a stretch, and I've had people go, any poster I put up, without fail, there will always be at least one person who will say, this is wrong, and it's oftentimes because they're taking they're interpreting it in a way that was not my intention. Sometimes they just, I think, want to be sort of contrarians, and so no matter what I'm saying, they're just different. Yeah, they just want to sort of see it as being a flawed statement or whatever, or just that I also believe that I've made statements, and then the next day I'll make a different statement that maybe is contradictory to that statement, the one prior, and because I think we as human beings are complex, and we are paradoxical, and we often contradict ourselves. There are times when I need encouragement in terms of someone saying, you need to just go for it. This is something you need to just go for. And then there's times that I need someone to say, you need to just wait for something and just like be patient. Yeah. And both of those things, I think, are valid, pieces of advice that, depending on the person who's walking by it and the situation they're bringing to it, is going to depend on which of those statements, means more to them. And, for me, that changes day to day. That changes moment to moment, and so I often say that most people that are walking by my work, they're doing the majority of the work. I try to keep my messages somewhat broad because I want everybody that walks by my stuff to sort of put their own DNA in, and sort of the statement is how it reflects on them is really only about their perspective and what they're going through, and that's going to sort of inform what the message means to them. Yeah. So a person, that's why I'm sort of careful about the environments that I put my posters up in terms of, I wouldn't, have a message about materialism in Compton. I'd save that for Beverly Hills. And I wouldn't have a message about, perseverance necessarily in Beverly Hills, because maybe that's something that people of Compton need more, So in that regard, I'll never be able to please everyone, because not every single person that walks by my stuff is going to be able to sort of find their path into what the statement means. But I try.
I feel like we keep. How do these people find you after? Like, you're saying they reach out to you. I mean, do you tag your Instagram or like an email address or something where they're able to reach out or give feedback?
Well, what's great about social media, when I started it, I had no concept of like a business plan or even a way of sort of creating something that could last. I mean, like a poster I put up could last an hour, could last a day, could last a week. Very infrequently it'll last a month or more. But on the internet, obviously, it can last forever, and it can be spread far and wide. I mean, because of things like Instagram, I've got fans in Russia that and people that live in countries where they're not even, English isn't even the native language. And so for me, having the ability to get people responding that way has been really encouraging, and has really helped me understand which messages sort of resonate the most, which ones get misinterpreted the most, and sort of it's given me just a better understanding of who these people that are seeing my work and responding to it are. A lot of times I'll get reposted on other Instagram accounts, and that's where you'll get a lot more of the people who respond with like, this is dumb, like emoji, frowny face, poop emoji, or whatever, And so in those situations, it's interesting to sort of almost like stand from a distance and kind of just observe the people and their response. But at the same time, it's also, I think, good for any creative person or really any kind of person who's created anything, to have a healthy understanding of when they need to sort of stop listening and sort of follow their own instincts and sort of say, you know what, this, I don't want to create specifically for to please, this. To please. I think that it's good to have an understanding of your whether it's your client base or whether it's your fan base or whatever you want to call it, to have an understanding of them in terms of not being too insular with your work, But at the same time, I think, you've got to find a happy medium of where you're creating artwork with your, from your own perspective first, rather than, it's sort of like a musician. If you have a hit song, and then of course your instinct is like, well, should I just keep writing that same song over and over and over again? But every time it's going to get less and less sincere, authentic, and so then it's going to become, I think that's when you can stop creating artwork that resonates with people. But at the same time, I think you also have to be careful not to sort of completely dismiss your fan base. There's a lot of bands who seem to have like gone out of their way to say like, this is the kind of fan base we want. Anybody else, we're not interested in you. So we're going to create music that's maybe harder to be inclusive.
You're
or whatever.
putting yourself in a box. So it's like the fine line of putting yourself into a box, but also paving your own path and doing something that you actually enjoy. Right. So one thing I wanted to ask you, how long ago was your first art put up in the streets?
I would say around 2000.
2000. Okay, so
You started with stickers, right?
Yeah, I started with the contact paper, and that was when I was in New York. And so I moved here in 2006, and so I started putting up stickers around here, around then, and then my first wheat paste
you
poster
put it on the wall or something like that.
just anywhere, on the wall, anywhere.
How do you pick? Like how do you pick where you want to put the work? Do you like scout it out beforehand?
Sometimes I would say like 20% of the time I'm scouting on a spot, but 80% of the time I'm just driving around.
It looks like
with a bunch of stuff in my trunk.
Do you do it in daylight?
Oh, always in daylight, because oftentimes if you have an air of authority, people will just assume, oh, he must have permission to do this. Course. If you're doing it at 2 a.m., no one's going to think that you're not up to no good, So I work in the daytime, and I generally, a lot of people will ask me why I picked wheat paste as opposed to, say, stencils or just freehand graffiti style stuff. And the primary reason was because I wanted to create a huge variety of stuff, so that when I saw a spot, if I could, if I had a poster that seemed applicable to that environment, and the environment could sort of give it a new layer and a new kind of context, that would be where, I wanted that. But I didn't want to, but cutting stencils, I mean, that the size that I wanted to work at, it would be just exhausting. And that's why a lot of times, some artists will feel like, oh, I want to just find one good spot and put up one good piece a month or whatever. But I wanted to put up like 10 or 15 different pieces a day, when I had the chance to go out and do it. So that's sort of the primary reason why I started with wheat paste, so I could create a larger variety of messages.
Sorry, what is wheat paste exactly?
Wheat paste is basically like, you might see it around like fly posters or whatever for like, movies or whatever you'll see on like...
You have to like glue it on, and then you like it kind of tapes on or something like that.
Yeah, it's like wallpaper.
Yeah.
So you put a layer of glue up, you put the poster up, and then you put another layer of glue over that to sort of seal it up or whatever. It takes about a half hour to dry, and it's it's essentially wallpapering. Yeah,
got it. And so basically, you come up with it on your computer, and then you send it to whoever it is prints for you, and then.
Yeah, when I first started, I'd create the message, and I draw the picture of me, scan it in, and then I designed a font, and then I started working. I would use the font and type out the message, and then merge it with the drawing of me, and then I would print it out, and I would go to FedEx and enlarge it on their enlargers. And they switched printers, so I eventually had to buy my own printer. So now I print at my house.
And this isn't cheap. I mean, you're printing big pieces. You're using your own material. How are you like funding yourself? I mean, when I first started, and most artists that I know have day jobs or some sort of way that a lot of artists will create do gallery shows, and a lot of that will fund their stuff. When I first started, the posters that I would print would start from anywhere from like $5 to $30. Oh yeah, each.
Oh my god!
And then when I bought my own printer, I had to invest some money into buying a printer. But once I did, now it's about 5 cents per poster.
Perfect.
So they kind of get you, because those big giant printers that are meant for like blueprints and stuff like that, they're not super cheap to buy. I bought mine refurbished, so
I know you can finance those too, right?
you can, yeah. It's pretty crazy. I mean, brand new, those printers cost about 18 grand.
Yeah, it's insane.
Mine,
It's
I think
insane.
I got mine for around 4,000.
So what's the typical size of your street art that you put up?
Well, it depends on what you're, like if I really like, if I feel like I've really gotten a sentiment that I want to get across, I'll blow it up from about 7 to 8 feet tall, about 5 feet wide.
And you need helpers for that, don't you?
What's that?
You need people to help you with that?
No, I can do it myself.
Really?
Yeah, I do it in strips basically. The
I
printer I have is 36 prints up to 36 inches wide, and I'll print usually like 2 or 3 sort of panels of it that'll be 8 feet tall. So you'll find a spot, put the glue up, put up the first sort of chunk, and then the second chunk, and then the third chunk, and then you are done.
Aligning that must be a bitch, huh?
Well, I usually this is sort of getting the weeds a little bit, but I usually leave some overlap so that I can sort of say, okay, this is where it's overlapping and kind of line it up. But yeah, it can be a challenge, and it can be a challenge when you're trying to work fast and maybe something gets crooked, and then it can be really frustrating, or the surface you're trying to paste on is just doesn't have a lot of tack to it, so it's harder. I mean, but I can usually put up a poster like that in 5 minutes, maybe less.
That's efficient. So I guess our podcast, even though it doesn't have to be, a lot of times we talk about business, right? And I would say probably naively that my brain maybe works a little bit different than yours, because I'm always thinking about ways to monetize things. It just, that's how I'm formed. And you're more art based and then turned into monetary, right? So because the way you're saying is street art, you put it up, and so I don't see the monetary value there, right? So how have you monetized this, or how are you planning, or what's going on?
Well, it's interesting you asked me that question, because a lot of times street artists specifically, will get flack for essentially being like hyping and creating a brand before they have a product, really. So, I mean, in the sort of heyday, and it's kind of softened a little bit. The sort of flavor of the month status of street art has kind of waned a little bit, but in the heyday of it, people were like, oh, you put up 5 posters, and then all of a sudden you can have a gallery show where you're selling $5,000 paintings, and a lot of people have criticized Shepard Fairey, for example, who does like the Obey things and like the Andre the Giant and stuff like that. And a lot, he gets criticized essentially saying that every time he puts up a poster somewhere, it's an ad for his brand. In his case, he has a clothing line, and he obviously does a lot of design work and so forth. But, he says to him, and I agree with this, I think that, I create art and put it on the street as a sort of service that I feel like I'm doing something good for. It would be sort of like saying, if you were a band and you had a free show where anybody could come, but you also sold CDs, but they're like, oh, well, what is it? Are you this, man of the people, or are you trying to make money? And he's like, can I be a little bit of both? And so for me, it's like, the art I put up on the street is free, but if people like my work and they want to have it, then they can buy prints that I sell on a website.
And what's that website?
That website is markmywordsgallery.com.
It's your personal website?
I work with a company, and they sort of help me.
So you have like a part on that website that's your stuff?
No, I mean, they're sort of like the primary sort of dealer for me or whatever. And then I have other dealers that I work with at galleries and things like that. Over the years, I've worked with a lot of different galleries and art dealers.
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely take your information and put it in the description.
Do you plan on, or do you put it on like T-shirts and like merch? Or
yeah, I work with a company called Design by Humans, and they're actually T-shirts and is kind of a challenge and apparel in that way, because you have to have a lot of it. You have to get like, you have to invest in like small, medium, large, lots of different copies of, getting 200 T-shirts of one message, and maybe that message doesn't sell as much as another one. I mean, it's like, as far as product goes, you sort of, at least I've learned, okay, what's the smarter way of doing business? What makes the most money? What requires the least investment, but actually has a good profit margin to it? So with Design by Humans, which is his t-shirt company, they print based on the order. So if a company or
Print on
if
demand.
yeah, so if a guy orders a t-shirt,
Yeah.
they just print it for him. So there's not a lot of stock that's been done, and I wouldn't have worked with them if I didn't think that the quality of stuff they print was legit. And so, I tested it out and I was like, wow, these t-shirts and sweatshirts and stuff are really good. As far as like, the main thing I sell a lot of is sticker packs and prints and posters and things like that. And there's kind of two ways of going about making money if you're an artist. And the first way is to kind of see yourself as being a sort of high-end, artist that sells a lot of work in galleries. And you'll get a lot of artists that go this method, and they'll sell a canvas for $5,000 or whatever. For me, I was always more interested in what I call the sort of dollar store mentality, which is where, if you have cheaper product, a guy walks into a dollar store, he only means to buy one thing. He walks out spending $20, you know? So I like to have a really affordable product. And so I generally want to make more money in my gallery shows selling cheaper stuff, but a lot of it, than I will selling more expensive stuff, but, fewer. So that's sort of been my business model. And Shepard Fairey, who does, again, the Obey and the clothing line stuff, his sort of method is the same way in the sense that he sells a lot of prints of his work. Prints are good, but they also lower the value that you can really kind of charge for canvases because, if you are an artist that deals with canvases, you got to sort of control how much you're putting into the, the market type of thing. So, he's reached a sort of limit as to how much he can sell his original art for, but he sells a lot of his prints and stuff like that. And so to me, that was always I always wanted that because I never liked the feeling of a person walking into a gallery and being like, oh, this message means a lot to me, but I could never afford that. So I always wanted every kind of level of person who's interested in my artwork, from the person who wants to spend $15 on a little mini poster to the person who wants to spend $5,000 on a canvas. All of those people can find some price point that meets what their desire is. And I think that's, to me, something I've learned over time. A lot of artists, I think, stumble over that a lot more in terms of they want to sort of be like the $10,000 canvas guy, but it's to me, I feel like that you're limiting your reach exactly.
Right. And so would you agree that pretty much your social media following is your most dedicated fan base? So I'm sure you're aware of this, but maybe something that might be helpful to you is if you were to run Facebook or Instagram ads, you could target only your followers.
Right.
So like if I had a following like you, it would be so easy to sell because I would literally post one of your artworks and like literally put it in front of their face because sometimes they don't know where to get it from, and put it in front of their face, $50. And I feel like that would bring in a lot of
it's definitely the primary way that I reach my fan base is through Instagram or Facebook. But the problem is now with the new algorithm, it does really screw you over in terms of if you're a small business.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Run ads. So you just put it in front of their face.
Even the ads don't.
Really?
Yeah. Like I've tried doing the ads and the, you can sort of see the insights. And generally I have access to roughly 1 to 5% of the people that follow me when I post something.
Yeah.
When I buy the ads, I'm getting maybe 10%.
Yeah, they changed that now. You can only get your audience to view it the more and more you bid on that, because there's other people that, let's say the person that's following you is also following, let's say, 10 other pages. So now you're in a bidding war with these pages that they're following bigger. So that's, I think, the algorithm that is changed to. And
Google, for example, even Google ads, right? So if you set it up and you do it like, let's say the people that follow you, it literally follows them around. So if they go to, let's say, like, I don't know, wholefoods.com or something, your ad will pop up somewhere, and it's cool because at that moment they might not have thought about buying your stuff, but it's like, oh, that seems cool, quickly buy. So I mean,
it's also, for me, it's frustrating because it felt more democratic when it was, if you're a brand and you do the work to get a following, whether you're doing that through advertising or whatever, if someone has knowingly decided to follow you, I feel like you should have access to those people. Right. Like, I feel sorry for Nike, who spends millions of dollars to try and get people following them on Facebook, only to have Facebook tell them, now you have to pay us to access those people. And at the same time, knowing that you're just, to me, it's it's an unfortunate situation when it used to be something where I would understand using different methods of getting a following, but to me it's like once you've got them, you should have access to them, because at that point there is no difference between a small business trying to use social media to their advantage and a big giant company that can afford to just pour millions and millions and millions of dollars into something.
I mean, I completely agree.
Right.
Just like I always got the sense of like you got to play their game sometimes.
Yeah,
you know?
everybody's got to eat. I feel like that's the end thing. Even like
your fans have no control over that. Instagram does, and you can't really say Instagram stop it. You know, you just have to sometimes play their game.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, it's tough because in some situations you can say, okay, well, maybe it's time that I move my business off of this, platform and try and find something that is more democratic. And I think, unfortunately, there's, the loss of people that follow you from going from one to the other is pretty dramatic in terms of like, oh, I was on Facebook, now I'm trying Instagram, now I'm trying Snapchat, now I'm trying whatever.
There was this new app that just came out, Vera.
Yeah, it's like a new.
It's a new app, and then it turned out that the CEO of that app, there was this controversy with them, and like completely everyone just on that app, and like everybody just left.
Bro, even like I know someone that has like 400,000 Instagram followers, and he made a new Instagram account, and he tried to get like he would literally post twice a day, trying to get people under the same like new Instagram, and like probably like 10% went over.
Yeah, it's because only 10% of his followers are
Actually
even
engaged.
aware that he has another Instagram page. Like it's frustrating because when you post something, you're not necessarily even reaching the same 10% every time, even necessarily. So you're like, you could post 1 million times a day and hope that over that 1 million times a day that you're reaching different pockets of your followers. I don't know.
And you get annoying.
Yeah, and you get really annoying, and people start unfollowing you because they're like, I wanted to see art. I didn't want to see, advertisements or whatever. It's a challenge, and it's frustrating. And I think that I feel like there is a happy middle ground. It just seems like 5 to 10% is just not enough.
Yeah, definitely not.
It should be like, 50%. And I mean, I get it. Like, I don't expect every single one of my posts to reach all of my followers, because obviously some of those followers have billions of people they follow. So, the way it was before the new algorithm was, I think, superior. And to me, it seems like, obviously, like, we heard all about the $1 billion drop in Snapchat because of their redesign, and I think to me,
Kylie's tweet,
right? I mean, I think to me it seems like these tech companies need to really understand, like, okay, when have we gone too far in terms of we're actually frustrating the people that make our site. In the case of whatever.
I think it was a point.
I mean, even when once Snapchat like went down, if anything, it gave Instagram and Facebook even more power to just like squeeze and monopolize.
Yeah, just like crunch them. But I want to ask you something. Have you commissioned any art piece, for example, even for our podcast right now? If we wanted right behind you, it says vibes, but it's like green, just like. I don't know what that is, but if we wanted to get commissioned to get like a nice piece behind us, is that something that you also do?
Yeah, I do. I've done a few commissions for different companies and brands. I just did a thing. I mean, that's, to be honest, where I get a lot of bigger paydays, I guess you could call them. Like I did a thing for the NBA All-Star Weekend with Budweiser.
Okay.
And I did... What's that?
What was it?
I painted a backboard, like a basketball backboard, for one of their events there, and they displayed it with other backboards that were painted by other artists. And I did another thing where I worked with Smirnoff. I did a campaign that was raising awareness and telling the stories of immigrants coming to this country. And what was kind of cool is because I have to be very careful because I don't want to sort of cheapen what I do by making it too sort of commercial, but they said they just wanted to have a campaign that was interactive and raised awareness of being open-minded. And they sort of settled on, we want to really focus on immigrants. And so I said, well, why don't we do this? I can go out and interview different people that are immigrants, and they can tell their stories of their dreams, their hopes, and the challenges they face. And then I will come up with a message that's sort of inspired by their story. So then on the posters that are around the city, it'll be the message I've come up with, and it says at the bottom, to hear the story that inspired this, go to this link, and then you could hear them actually tell their story. Oh. And that was really the only. I mean, it wasn't like Smirnoff didn't say like, okay, that sounds good, but can we also make sure that they say they like drinking Smirnoff? That would have been a real bummer. And so the fact that they allowed me to create this, these pieces of artwork freely, and not not meddle with it or muck around with it too much was really cool. And I think I did get some flack from other artists for doing something so corporate, but to me I thought, well, I get a little bit of money, I can give a little money to these people that I'm interviewing and really kind of give them a voice. And especially in this day and age, it's a challenge for minorities to be able to tell their stories, especially immigrants with today's political climate. And so giving the ability to give them a platform to speak and tell their story and have it be paid for by Smirnoff and put around the city, and have, for once it was I had permission, they had like a whole team of people that were putting stuff up on my behalf, which was great because I didn't have to worry about getting arrested.
Have you been arrested before?
I've never been arrested. I've been stopped a number of times by police officers, and it helps to just be sort of respectful. And also with wheat paste, I can peel my poster off and kind of clean it up and say, okay, I'll never do it again, and just hope they haven't seen any of my other stuff. But yeah, so like that was a good way of making some money, but also getting to create artwork that I felt like had some positive impact on the world. So there's things like that, but then I also I painted a couple of different companies, walls and things like that, which is always fun. It's a little bit of a challenge because, and this kind of goes back to what I was saying before with, if I had sort of really had a smarter business plan when I first started, I don't know if I would draw myself into it, because not every company wants to see some guy, drawing on a wall. And also it's tough too, because I have to be careful in terms of sort of protecting the integrity of my quote brand, because a lot of times people will say, we came up with this message and we want you to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but if I don't come up with a message, then I'm really not, then I'm just painting your words on a wall or whatever. And then that feels like if I start doing that with other people's messages, and all of a sudden it doesn't have the integrity that it once had, where it's like, these are messages that kind of come from my brain and spill out. And so a lot of times when I'll get people that that want to do commission stuff, I'll say, just, you can pick anything from the hundreds and hundreds of messages I put up over the year, or give me a theme and let me try and come up with stuff, and maybe it'll be something that resonates with you. And so when that works out, and when the brands are into that, it's great. But I probably don't get as much commission work or licensing work or whatever as other artists that don't necessarily sort of have rules or have created artwork and kind of be a little bit more generalized.
And even when it's still words, like it's word art. It's not like
yeah. I mean, when I started doing this, because I was a screenwriter, and I never really saw myself as having much skill in illustrating or in painting or anything like that. And so I thought, well, maybe instead of seeing that as being a minus, I can really kind of lean into it and say, you know what, this is what would give my artwork a sort of trademark feel to it. And so when I started creating my artwork, I decided I was just going to really embrace the sort of flaws. And that's kind of a big part of that's kind of a big part of what I do. Is I think it's really important to embrace what makes you unique. And oftentimes what makes you unique are the things that you're most embarrassed of, or the things that are, that you think of as being flaws or scars or whatever. A lot of people will ask me, what's your sort of big advice for young artists? And it's always like, try your best to embrace what makes you unique, as opposed to just being derivative of the people and the artwork that you like.
Well said.
Yeah.
Has anyone tried to replicate what you do?
I mean, I guess you'd have to ask other people if they think that, oh, that's too similar or whatever.
That's a yes.
No, I don't know. I mean, I can't say I'm the first person that's ever used text and art. So I mean, who am I to judge? But and I think also it's that's one of the reasons why I try really hard to create messages that I think are different and unique and nuanced and hopefully profound to some degree. I really, I think it's not difficult to do what I do, but I want to create artwork that I can feel proud of and say, okay, I think that this message has some value to it beyond sort of just being kind of bland and generic.
Absolutely, yeah. So with that said, would you say you've had inspirations, like not growing up, because this isn't really what you're doing growing up, but in the past 18 years, what or who has inspired you to do what you do? Like for example, someone like Alec Monopoly, right? Like he has something where it's not his face, but he has a certain image that he always puts up.
Right. Monopoly guy.
Yeah, Monopoly guy.
Well, I would say as far as inspiration, I think it's important to look outside of your medium to find inspiration. And I think this is true in any kind of business or any kind of thing where you're creating something, is to not become too sort of, not put on the sort of horse blinders and only looking at, what you're in your medium. But I like to look at photography. I like to look at, poetry. I like to look at even, dance and music obviously is a huge inspiration, and theater and novels and things like that. I think that it's very easy to sort of become too self-referential if you're only looking at street art. I would say, like, if you're a rap artist, you should be also listening to jazz. You should be, listening to, instrumental stuff. You should be listening to, avant-garde music and stuff like that, because that's how I think you're going to really find something that you can utilize. And that's why I think, when you look at a lot of different, creative people, especially artists, and I mean, obviously like the hip hop world right now, you see all of these different influences that are coming in and shaping it and changing it in really exciting ways. And I think those are the things that are going to be really, kind of disrupt your kind of, whatever it is that you're sort of trying to break into. That said, I think there's a lot of fantastic artists in Los Angeles, a lot of fantastic artists all across the world that I look to for inspiration. Obviously, I think any street artist that says they don't like Banksy is kind of being a contrarian. I like I said, I look to Shepard Fairey. He has a lot of really interesting things that he's done as a businessman, and I think that you can sort of say, okay, what is has he stuck to his guns and stuck to his convictions in terms of maintaining integrity and maintaining a brand, but at the same time, giving himself the opportunity to create work that people on a massive global scale can appreciate. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, if anyone wants to see more of this, your Instagram account is official_Morley.
Yep.
Right.
And I have a website that's just iammorley.com.
I am Morley.
And I think it's easier if we just link.
Yeah, we'll link everything you guys on the bottom.
Yeah, sure.
And if they want to reach out to you, if they want to work with you, whatever it is,
email,
I guess through email or DM or whatever it is, but we'll leave all of that in the bottom. One thing I want to ask you, last thing, was what's one of your biggest works that you've done? Like, what's or
your favorite one?
One of your favorite, yeah, that received so much like traction that you're like, whoa, like I wasn't expecting that. So I'm curious on that.
Well, it's interesting. That's a tough question, because for me, I sort of I like when people respond to my work, and so oftentimes I don't necessarily have a really good sense as to why something sort of hits when something else doesn't. So the stuff that I think, I feel like I really got that sentiment down right, isn't necessarily the one that people are going to respond to the most. And sometimes I'll think like, oh, that was kind of, I feel like that was kind of easy or simple, and yet people will respond.
Sometimes
to
timing is important.
Timing, exactly. So, I mean, I will say one of my favorite ones is one that says, "Let's fall in love like our parents aren't divorced," because one of the things I really strive for when I create my art is to take complex ideas and sort of summarize them into a very short and brief and easy to ingest, and yet at the same time something that will make you think and make you and can kind of expand inside your mind a little bit once you've read the statement.
Just multiple interpretations about that saying, I feel like, because I probably got something different than what Medvin probably did.
Well, and I think also, for me, I can say my version of it is probably a statement about, sort of pushing past, cynicism, or pushing past sort of like what the odds are that something that you'll succeed in terms of will our love last when like odds show it probably won't necessarily, or who knows.
Yeah.
So that notion was one that I thought, like, I got that. I kind of summarized that in a very brief statement that is easy to consume, but also one that kind of expands like rice in your once it's in your system.
Oh, well, if you guys want to see more work like that, follow his Instagram. It was a pleasure having you on, man. I appreciate
Pleasure
it.
being here.
Hopefully we'll see a lot more of your stuff in the future. And from the Vibes guys and Morley, we're out, man.
Thank you.
Peace.